Faithful Hall of Fame. Abraham. This is Abram, who will later be known as Abraham.
Hey!
When Abram was in the land called Canaan, God told him to look over the land as far as his eyes could see. God promised that the land would be blessed and that Abram would have many children. 25 years passed. Abram and Sarai were very old and still had no children. God appeared to Abram and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm your shield. A son is coming. Look at the heavens and count the stars. Someday, you will have as many children as there are stars in the sky." Then God told Abram that his name would no longer be Abram, but it would be Abraham, which means father of many nations. God also told Abraham that Sarai's name would be changed to Sarah. God promised to bless Sarah and told Abraham that she would become pregnant and have a son. God made a covenant with Abraham that day. His covenant was a promise that Abraham would have many sons and they would be blessed.
Have you ever had a friend or a family member promise to do something for you? Maybe they've promised to give you something that's theirs when they've finished using it. You know, it's really hard to wait for that thing that's been promised. I remember when I was a kid, I would always get anxious waiting for promised gifts or for a promised vacation or a promised trip to go bowling. Like, it was always hard to wait. Waiting patiently is tough when you've been promised for something. And in our Bible story, in our Big God story today, we're going to talk about a guy called Abraham. Abraham shows up on the scene and God kind of instructs him, hey, get your family, your wife Sarah, and go to a different country. Go and live somewhere else. And Abraham, he's obedient and he chooses to follow God's direction and leading. Abraham is faithful. He does what he's supposed to do. And one day, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 15, God says to Abraham, he says, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Basically, God was saying, hey, count the sky and count the stars up in the sky. There are tons and tons of stars up there. And he says, that's how many children and descendants and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren you're going to have. He says, hey, your family is going to be huge. Here's the crazy thing. Abraham and his wife Sarah, they were already old and they didn't have any children. God was promising they would have this big family, and they were old and they didn't have any children. But God is a covenant keeper. That means that God keeps his promises. It wasn't always easy for Abraham and Sarah to trust in God's promise. They were older. They didn't have any children. It was tough to imagine that God could provide a child to them, let alone as many offspring and descendants as the stars in the sky. And yet, they waited, they were patient. Sometimes they tried to do things their own way, but eventually they saw God fulfill his promise. God is a covenant keeper. And Abraham and Sarah, they had a son named Isaac. And Isaac would carry on their family line for many years to come. Even though it's difficult to wait, we can trust that God is a covenant keeper. He keeps his promises.